Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of Trades Talk. Today we've got a special guest for you guys, Mr. John Vlay, a true green industry entrepreneur, an incredible background, 35 years at Jensen Landscape, now involved in many different companies, including electric, battery-powered equipment, robotics, and an exciting announcement of his new venture that we're going to get into. So, John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Justin. Thanks for having me on your podcast. Also, Maggie, nice to meet you today over the phone, over the Zoom. And yeah, I'm really excited to do this and talk to you about what I've been doing. Like you said, I was with Jensen Landscape for 35 years, and it sounds like a long time, and I guess it is. I started with them in 1983. Back then, the two owners, Scott and Dwayne, the superintendent, the estimator, had just bought the company from Fred Jensen the year before. It was the two of them, our office manager, myself, and 10 laborers in the field. We were doing like $2 million a year.
When you came into Jensen's, it's doing $2 million. When did you mentioned the founder? Was it Jeff Jensen?
Fred Jensen.
Fred Jensen. When did Fred start the company? What year was it started?
1969. He emigrated from Denmark in the 70s. Went up, he worked in a lumbering camp up in British Columbia. He moved down to California because he wanted to be able to work all year long. Settled up in the Bay Area, worked with A&J Shooter, which some people know the name Shooter and Butts. He was one of those founders. So he was involved in the industry very early on, and then started his own company in 1969. In 1982, he sold it to Dwayne and Scott. These guys were great. Scott, had an MBA from Stanford, which I always wanted to go on and get my MBA at Stanford. I got my business economics degree at UCLA. And then Dwayne, he had a landscape architecture degree from Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. Shout out Maggie.
I was like, that's my alma mater. That's incredible.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's small world. And so anyhow, I got a chance to see how they were, purchasing the company from Fred while I started. And they had a deal where, the more revenue they made, the faster they had to pay them off. So, we started growing the company, which was great because they got more ownership sooner, but they had to come up with the cash to pay them off. But so I got to see, them purchasing it from Fred. And, I came in there and, started learning a lot from both Dwayne and Scott, who'd been in the industry for a while. 11 years later, I decided, hey, I'd been there 11 years. I was VP of estimating. I was ready to, do the acquisition myself. So I made a couple of purchase proposals to Dwayne Watson. And, he looked at it and he said, yeah, the price is right. This is right. But, it doesn't make sense because I'd be paying with after-tax dollars and he'd get taxed on it. So he'd have to pay taxes. He said, that just doesn't make sense. And he did not like paying taxes. He did pay them. He didn't like it. So anyhow, I think that ultimately led to us creating an ESOP, an employee stock ownership plan. And I thought to myself, well, okay, either I can, go off on my own and start my own company and, have, 100% or partner with somebody 50% of something really small, or, I can stay with Jensen and get, a small piece of a bigger pie, which I decided to do. And again, now my whole goal was let's get as much profit and let's put as much into the contributions so that we can buy Dwayne and Scott out as fast as possible. So, during that time, we bought Jensen Landscape Services, which was a maintenance company that was also founded by Dwayne Scott and Don DeVever, had the maintenance company. So after we started the ESOP ultimately bought Jensen Landscape Services. And, so all of a sudden we had a huge pool of employees that owned it, ultimately got up to over 200 participants in the ESOP, which was great. So, I look at it as Fred was the first generation, Wayne and Scott were the second generation, the ESOP was the third generation, and then when we ultimately sold to Monarch Landscape, that's the fourth generation, right, which is still going very strong today. So it's got, some great history, and I'm very happy with what it's doing and the growth that they've done.
Let me ask you a little bit more about the ESOP, if you don't mind. Obviously you stated a lot of great things that come out of it. Like for someone maybe in your position thinking about going this route, what are some high level pros and cons that you would point out regarding how you rolled out the ESOP and the benefits and also the hard times with it?
one of the biggest advantages is the tax advantage. So it works kind of like a profit sharing plan where at the end of the year, you determine a certain amount based on eligible W-2 wages. And let's say it's 10%. So if somebody's making $100,000, $10,000 goes into this pool to go ahead and buy stock when it's available. You can do anywhere from, I think, 3% up to 25%. And we tried to maximize that as much as we can because we wanted to, we did it in 3 tranches. So once we bought the first tranche, we would buy the second tranche and, we'd all try to increase the value, which was also good for the sellers because when they sold the second tranche, it was at a higher valuation than the first tranche. We're paying them with before tax dollars. We were an S Corp, so there was no federal taxes on your earnings that are owned by the ESOP. And then the money they got, they were able to put it into a 401k or an IRA. It was not taxed until they took it out, at retirement age. So there were some real big tax advantages. It also worked out well for us because in 2008, we did an acquisition. We bought Huppy Landscape out of Sacramento and the North Bay, and they actually, converted to an ESOP. So our ESOP bought their ESOP. So the proceeds that Chris Huppy got were not taxed like a regular acquisition. So he then was able to take those proceeds, through his ESOP and not get taxed on it until, he wanted to at retirement age.
That's pretty cool.
There's really big tax advantages. Another advantage from kind of a culture standpoint is now you've got, 200 plus participants. And, one of the statistics I learned at one of the ESOP seminars was that companies that are ESOPs that really, lean into the culture, really educate their participants about the advantages of ownership, they'll do like 6% better than just a regular non-ESOP company. But the problem is if you got an ESOP and you don't train your people, if you don't build that ESOP culture, you'll do 4% worse. It's a double-edged sword. And, what was interesting is, every year we would have an ESOP get together and we would talk about how the company's doing. We would, go over the financials, the revenue, this and that. And one exercise we did that I thought was very interesting, we got, a group of superintendents and foremen and laborers together. And we asked them, hey, we had 100 pennies on the table. We said, hey, for every dollar we bring in, how much do you think, the owners of the company get to keep? And they were like, 50 cents, 40 cents, or some people said 80 cents. And we're like,
oh, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, exactly. we're not Google, but anyhow, we show them, out of this dollar, this many percent goes to laborers, to wages and salaries, and this much goes to equipment, and this much, and in a good year, we might have say 8 cents. 8 to 10 cents. And of that 10 cents, 2 cents goes to the ESOP, 2 cents goes to the bonuses, and, this goes to taxes. So at the end of the day, maybe we've got, 5 cents after all the bonuses and ESOP contributions, et cetera. People were just blown away. So it's kind of that open book management that lets people realize that, hey, if we can just do 1% more, that can funnel down to the bottom line. And so it really gave a lot of our employees more of the ownership mentality and how what we did contributed to that ESOP contribution. And in the early days, we did dividends on ownership, which, people at the end of the year, they would get a check based on their ownership share. Once we started getting into the acquisition mode, we stopped on the dividends because we needed that money to go do acquisitions, which was also successful. Now the downside, probably once you're, 15 years into the ESOP and you've got a lot of people with large balances, if people quit or people retire, you've got a repurchase obligation. So we were getting to the point where we were paying $500,000 a year out to ex-employees or retired employees. And that was really hindering our ability for CapEx, to go hire more salespeople, to really grow the company. So even though we really weren't for sale in 2015, when I first talked to Brian Helgo of Monarch, I was thinking, well, heck, I see this kind of construction boom coming down the pike, and we're kind of undercapitalized, and the more we grow the company, the bigger our repurchase obligation becomes.
Right.
So and I love talking to Brian. He came with a lot of experience in Valley Crest. He really loved construction, which I love construction. He did very well in maintenance, so it seemed like a good fit. And so we ultimately sold to Monarch Landscape, which was funded by One Lot Capital. That was their first intro into the landscape space. Probably I forget how many years ago, 3 years ago or so, they sold to Audax out of Texas. I actually invested some of my money into Monarch, and always was a big cheerleader for Monarch and Brian and what they were doing. So then when they sold to Audax, I got another bite out of the apple, and I love what they're still doing to continue on with growing the company.
Well, I love the summary there, and I think high level, it sounds like the ESOP and a lot of the pro side, the positive side, is you get more of an ownership mindset at the employee level, get an opportunity to build some wealth at that employee level. But on the cons, I can see some restrictions, some challenges around. I've got to imagine you got to keep a substantial amount of cash on board because you've got this pretty high liability on the balance sheet that it's almost like this, unfunded pension in a way of you got to pay that off when people are ready to walk away and retire. So did that ESOP structure, just quick answer, did it help you guys grow faster or what in the beginning and maybe slow down in the end? Or, how did it contribute to the overall growth of Jensen during that time?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a tipping point. We're in the early days. Everybody got behind it. We were getting dividends. We were growing the company, but then it got to a point as the value of the company went up, that repurchase obligation went up, and also after 10 years is when people they start getting into retirement age, or we had the Great Recession of 2008. We had to pare back some, and had to pay out some people. So it was a real balancing act of having to pay out those participants, and keeping enough in for CapEx and growth. So that was tough. The other thing that I think is important to start for anybody thinking of starting an ESOP is you really have to have a good management team in place. You can't just say, "Hey, I'm ready to retire. I'm going to have the the management team take it over," and they really haven't been trained up on how to run the business or know all aspects of operations, sales, estimating, purchasing, etc. That's why doing that tier, that tranche effect. It was actually 3 tranches to buy Jensen Landscape, the union company, and then a 4th tranche to buy the maintenance company. And so, they stayed on for 11 years from when we started in 94 to when they got out of it in 2003, 2005. They knew that the management team was growing along with them kind of selling, first third, second third, third third. So you gotta have a strong management team. And I was, lucky to be surrounded with, great people on the estimating side, the operations side, the maintenance side. And, when I became CEO in 2004, and now, having started in construction, all of a sudden I'm in charge of the maintenance business. So I'm reaching out, who do I talk to? I actually hired Kevin Kehoe as a consultant. He came in, looked at our business. He was great. He had an MBA, and, he was in finance. And I'm saying, man, you're a smart guy. You've got all this financial expertise. What are you doing in the landscape industry?
He's building a software.
I know, but he just said, I really love this industry. I love the people. I love the being in the outdoors, working with plants and living material. And, this was before he started Aspire. So he gave me some really great advice, a lot of benchmarking that we used for the maintenance company. And, I just love what he had done to grow Aspire and, what it's doing today. And right now, not to be, necessarily a plug, but, there's just so many companies that are using Aspire. And I've served on several boards over the past several years, and they've all utilized Aspire. When they go and do roll-ups and buy other companies, they get them involved in Aspire. So it's really, kind of the gold standard for, any, small, medium, large businesses. So unless you're going to, build your own ERP system and your own CRM, Aspire is really the way to go. And, I'll talk a little bit later what we're doing with maintenance companies, but we will certainly be using Aspire as we grow.
It's interesting because first off, I will take the plug any day for software that pays my paycheck, but also that I truly believe in, being in the industry as long as I've been in the industry. But I think what you had one bit there I wanted to touch on where you talked about, when companies are buying another company, or when they're investing, when private equity is investing, and it's almost kind of becoming a requirement to have an industry platform in place, or they'll say, hey, you need to go put this in place before let's have a conversation. And so that kind of leads me down to your sale to Monarch. So when you decided to sell to Monarch, first, like, why did you choose them? And then second, what did you learn about as far as private equity and M&A and all that is concerned during that time?
We're opening Pandora's box here.
This is what the listeners love to hear. This is what we just heard coming off of the NALP Elevate event. Like, the industry is coming right now and they need information, especially from people who've done it and experienced it firsthand, like yourself.
I'll be honest, we actually, we were approached by, a family office in 2007 to buy Jensen, and they were going to, partner us up with another company in California, but they were very much in the residential space. Well, one thing led to another, and, the housing prices dropped, unfortuitously. And so, they wanted to go with us because we were diversified. We had construction, we had maintenance. Our maintenance was also diversified, public works, high-end residential, commercial, etc. But anyhow, because the residential market was, falling, that deal kind of fell through. So that was kind of my first intro into family offices. But then, 2008 hit. We got through that. Which there's obviously some issues getting through 2008 with companies going bankrupt and layoffs and things like that. We got through it, and then in 2010 we get a call from Brickman wanting to buy us, and we just kind of said, well, hey, thanks. We appreciate the offer, but, we're not going to sell low. So we're still building back from the 2008. So, maybe call us in a couple of years. Well, we really didn't think about it. We were just focused on, growing the business, growing the profitability, becoming more stable, and put a strategic committee together. We wanted to really get to kind of a 50-50 blend of construction and maintenance. We did the acquisition of Huppy. We did a few other tuck-ins. And, in 2000, I was getting all kinds of calls from people wanting to buy our company. And, a lot of them, I threw out the letters. Actually, I had a file folder with all the letters I got from these private equity companies. I got all kinds of phone calls. This is the days before cell phones, so I didn't have to have a bunch of messages on my cell phone. But, finally, I got this one call from this guy, Brian Helgo, and I ignored his call. And then, another fellow that I knew from Valley Crest called me up and he says, hey, John, I think you got a call from Brian. You ought to call him up and, see what he has to say. I said, oh, really? Do you work with Brian? He says, yeah. I said, is he good? He said, yeah, he's really good. I said, well, have him send me his resume. If he's good, I'll hire him. So he said, just call him and talk to him. So I called him. We got together and, just had a first conversation. And, it was really him and his vision and, his knowledge of the industry and his background that, I connected with him. And, he had, he'd won a process to, find a private equity company to back him, which he did. And they were young. He was young. I used to be young. And so it all just kind of made sense. And so we really didn't put it out, to auction. That was the other thing, is because we were an ESOP. If we did it as a certain sale, then we would have to open it up to the vote of all the participants, which I didn't want to do because I didn't want it out on the street that, hey, Jensen's for sale. So we were able to keep it, very, quiet amongst ourselves until we finalized the due diligence, which did take a while because, one, a lot of private equity companies aren't too, they don't understand construction like they understand maintenance, because of the ESOP. The ESOP was another, issue they had to wrap their head around. And, but ultimately we sold. And, I stayed on for a couple of years with Monarch and Brian. They put me in charge of safety. They had me helping Brian with acquisitions. And also, it took me 2 years to close out the ESOP, IRS and attorneys and administrators. And so it took quite a while to close that out. But now your question about private equity. People hear stories of private equity. They're all sharks and, be careful. They're going to, undercut you at the 11th hour and this and that. But, these guys at Monarch, they're all, mostly all Harvard graduates, very smart. I worked with them very closely on the due diligence. They were very nice, very respectful. And I really respected them for, their professionalism, their smarts. They were able to look into the financials and ask the questions. I'm like, wow, yeah, this is what happened, and this is why it happened, and this is what we're doing to correct it. So, and then, once we sold, and now I'm on the other side trying to acquire other companies, and I'm sitting there with Brian and with the private equity group to kind of see, the other side of it. And it was a great experience. So I think, people that are getting involved in the landscape space, if they're the right people, they're working with integrity, and you can just learn a lot. I'm always trying to learn, and that's why I think the 2 years with Monarch was like getting my master's degree in landscaping. So, and then I ultimately became involved with another private equity company, which we'll talk about, but same thing, very, very impressive people.
Well, it's just an amazing journey that Jensen has gone through as a company, and then your oversight of that company. Okay, so real quick, and I'm gonna, Maggie, interrupt us if we go deep on this, but you did something at Jensen that I want to highlight, and I think it's so important for today's leaders, and maybe not the CEO, but someone in the management team. A lot of people are stepping away from their businesses today. A lot of owners are stepping away. They're retaining equity, but they're letting go of the day-to-day operations. And they're kind of finding this perfect little balance of working 3 to 4 hours a week, owning 100% of the business, and getting all the profits and everything of the business, but not having to actually work because they have a team in place, which is like what all the business books preach, right? Is like, get your team in place so you don't have to work. You go be on a beach in Mexico. However, that only lasts for so long until everybody on the management team looks around and says, hey, where the hell is Justin? Because we're doing all this work and he's over there taking all the profits. So I do think that in today's world, managers and leaders need to go to the owners, specifically single owners who own 100% of the business, and start the conversation around buyout, about equity purchasing, and how can you leverage the business's profits and cash flow to buy equity from the owner sooner than later. Because if you're growing this business from 2 to 5 to 10 to 20 million, well, I would have rather started that equity transition at 2 million than try to start it at 20 million, just simply because of the value of the business. So if someone is the general manager of a landscape company that's doing 3 or 4 million a year and they own 0% of that company, what's your one piece of advice for them on how to start the equity transfer conversation with the owner, and specifically if they are not related to the owner, similar to how your position was at Jensen?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak from experience. And, with me, I learned a lot, from Dwayne, from Scott. And, Dwayne was, a little bit older. So, he was more towards the retirement age. And I just approached him and said, look, I love what we're doing here. I really want to, I want to make this my career, but I want some ownership. We'd get, nice bonuses every year and, salary increases every year, but I wanted equity. So, he was amenable to that, but it took me making the first step to go to him and say, hey, I want some ownership. I hired a business broker that, helped me, come up with a valuation of the company at the time. I got, all of their financials, looked through that, saw how much they were making in salary. I'm like, wow, I really want to stay here. There's some money in this thing. But it kind of opened up Dwayne and Scott's eyes that, hey, either I've got to get some kind of ownership or I'm going to leave and have ownership somewhere else. Started on my own or partnered with, somebody else in the industry. And I did have those talks with others in the industry to go off and do that. But I think that's what really gave rise to them researching how else to do it. And that's how they found out about the ESOP. And so, but then again, it takes somebody that's willing to, kind of put yourself out there and say, I don't want something for nothing. I'm going to work for it. I'll pay you for it. And now there's all kinds of other things you can, start with phantom stock, SROs, different vehicles to start getting stock.
To sum that up, right, is just go and ask. Like, don't be afraid to ask and speak up for yourself, because I know from experience with the transition we went through, those owners have so much other things going on. They're not going to bring up that conversation. Even if they do, they're rarely going to take action. So I think what I'm hearing from you is you need to speak up for yourself and go to it and just say, hey, this is what I want. And look, equity is not for everybody. Ownership's got its liabilities and risks, just as it has its benefits.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the ownership mentality of the person. I started as an assistant estimator, counting trees and shrubs and, coloring and drawing, green for sod and orange for flats at 12 inches on center. I was, started at the very bottom of estimating. But, when I started there, I came out with a desire to, someday I want to own my own company. So whenever I had a decision to make, at Jensen, the first couple of years, I would just say to myself, all right, well, what would I do if I owned this company? And then I would come up with a solution. I'd go to Dwayne, hey, here's the issue. This is what I think we ought to do. And, 9 out of 10 times he'd agree. And then, 1 out of 10 times he'd say, well, no, why don't you think about doing this? And I'm like, oh man, I didn't even think about that. That's awesome. So I really used my first, 5 to 10 years as a learning experience on what I would do if I owned a company. And I think it takes that mentality of, whether they're, a manager, a supervisor, a vice president, but it's, ownership's not for everybody. There's pros and cons. So, it takes the right makeup. And I think then it also takes an ownership or an ownership group that is willing to let go of some of the reins as those managers, step up and show that they can not only grow, but, not only, take over the company, but grow the company.
My dad's got a saying. He says it's a lot better to own a piece of a watermelon than an entire grape. And that, he had 100% of a business 10 years ago. Now he owns a smaller stake, minority stake, and the business is worth a whole lot than it was 10 years ago. But John, I know you've been such a serial entrepreneur over the last decade, and I want to toss it to Maggie because I know she's got some questions around where you're at and what you're doing today.
Yeah. Well, first, thank goodness that everyone is not entrepreneurs, because the world needs some of us out there who love to work for very ambitious entrepreneurs and support. So your shirt you got on there, Garden Land.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what's going on there, what your involvement is? I know we had Richard on a while ago now, almost a year ago. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about what's going on there?
Yeah. So it's interesting, just how everything kind of, circles back and, weaves together. So Garden Land is a landscape equipment dealership 7 minutes from my house, where, I would always take my lawnmower in for them to service it. I didn't want to use Jensen resources to, take care of my personal stuff. So I went in there, they told me about True Fuel. So I'd go every couple of months to buy a gallon of True Fuel. When I was still at Jensen and, when I had sold to Monarch, I went in there to get my lawnmower serviced at Garden Land. I saw the sign that said, ask me about robotic mowers. So I said, oh, okay. So I'm talking to them. And I'm always looking for labor savings, in construction, in maintenance. It's all about labor savings to get that competitive advantage. So, I talked to the manager, Brian Santos, and he said, yeah, this was back in 2000. He says, yeah, they're really big in Germany and they're starting to take hold in America. These were the Husqvarnas. And I said, oh, that's great. Well, can I get a demo? And, let me get Brian Hogo to, fly up there and we'll go take a look at this demo. Because if I can show them how our maintenance company can save labor, that's great. So anyhow, he had it at Richard Ogawa's front yard. Brian and I, went to his place in Los Gatos, and, there's Brian with the mower upside down like a dead turtle. And, he couldn't get it running after like 20 minutes. So I said, hey, it doesn't look like this is going to work. Do you have anywhere else we can go look at it? So he pointed us to the Google campus. And by the way, the reason it didn't work is somebody had done some irrigation repair, broke the guide wire. And so that's why it wasn't running. But anyhow, they sent us over to the Google campus, and we got to the lawn where, even though it wasn't running, we could see where it had mowed and where it hadn't mowed. It was like in one of those Pong games where it would just go like a Roomba, on a lawn. So, some areas got mowed once, twice, three times. Other areas were totally unmown. So it just looked like a bad haircut. But kind of right off the bat, I thought, man, if somebody could come up with a robotic mower that doesn't require the guide wires, which are expensive to install and they're easily broken, and it can go back in parallel lines, so you're not missing any lawn, and is big enough for commercial use, they would have something. Well, about a month later, a fellow Vistage member, I went to Vistage, a group of CEOs, and one of the fellow Vistage members told me, hey, John, I know this venture capital firm down in Santa Monica that are looking at building a electric robotic mower for the commercial industry. So again, I'm like, that's great. So, you had Brian and I go meet with them in Santa Monica. It was very conceptual. And, we gave them all of our feedback on what a robotic mower should do, what you should be working on, the prototypes, et cetera. Well, anyhow, shortly thereafter, I left Jensen and Monarch to go, pursue other things. About a year later, I got a call from that robotic mower company, which ultimately became Graves. They made me the CEO for 4 years. And, that's why I really got involved with robotic mowers. We were building a 16-inch electric robotic mower, raised $17.5 million on crowdfunding. Unfortunately, our engineers, were telling me, hey, by the end of 2021, we're going to be able to do this, this, and this. So they started hiring business developers saying, I got to start selling this thing. But then, we'd run into issues, glitches, and it wasn't quite ready for prime time. But, what's funny is, through my work with Jensen and going to Gardenland, it led to Graves, which really got me excited about electric equipment, robotic equipment. And then, after 4 years there, I was no longer with Graves, and Richard Ogawa called me up and said, hey, John, I know you were CEO of Jensen for many years. We got to know you during, your time at Graves. Would you, work with me at Gardenland, because I want to go and acquire other landscape dealerships. And what I liked about Gardenland is they had really started leaning in to the battery operated equipment. Most dealerships, that's all they know is gas powered. There's a lot of repair revenue from gas powered. With battery, you don't have as many parts, you don't have as much maintenance. So it's a very different model. But he also started getting very much into battery because a lot of his customers were servicing customers like Apple, Facebook, Google, that did not want gas-powered equipment on their campuses. So he really became kind of the go-between of the manufacturers, the battery-operated manufacturers, and the customers that were maintaining those campuses. He worked very closely with Mean Grain and told them what they needed to do, made a lot of improvements, and he's really become kind of the go-to person for many of these battery-powered equipment companies to get his advice. And so I love what he's doing in the battery space. And then he also started a company called TOWA, TOWA, which is a charging solution, because as all these companies go from gas-powered to battery, you got to charge them. And I was at an Equip Expo a couple of years ago where, Brian Helgo sat on the panel, and Nada Duna, and, the person in charge of OPEI. And, they were talking about, hey, from California, this is what we're doing. We're moving to battery. But, there's some problems with that. It's very expensive to get battery-powered equipment. 2 is the charging, the infrastructure. People don't have the infrastructure to charge all the batteries. And 3, what do we do with these batteries once they're no good? There's an issue with disposal or recycling. So anyhow, Richard Ogawa with Gardenland, he's taking care of 2 of those problems. One, because they're so expensive, he started something called the Pro Plan, where now you can buy electric equipment and you put a deposit down, and then you pay a monthly fee, and you can, trade out the equipment. So you might want to try a steel blower here, try that for 3 months, and then you want to change it over to a Greenworks, because all these manufacturers are improving their products so much at such a fast pace that you don't necessarily want to get into one brand, because 2 years later, something else might be much better. But with the Pro Plan, you can buy equipment much cheaper, almost like a lease, and you can trade it in. The thing with that is if your mower goes down, they'll replace it with one that works, because they don't because Gardenland will own the equipment and they'll just trade it out. So there's no more downtime waiting for things to be repaired. It just works, many, many benefits on your profit. And what's interesting is we really thought this would be taken hold by the smaller companies, the 1 truck, 2 truck, 3 trucks that, aren't capitalized to go get it. But we're seeing some, large companies are actually wanting to adopt it because now, it's not just about EBITDA, it's about EBIT and, how are they managing their business on a month-to-month basis. So we're finding it's great for the small companies, it's great for the large companies. And then with TOA, I know their flagship product is a PDM, a power distribution manager. So it comes with 4 plugs, 120 volt, 20 amps, and you can, plug in 4 different batteries, and they can be steel batteries, Crest batteries, any brand. It's brand agnostic, and it will charge them every 30 seconds. It checks with the amperage. And the thing with charging batteries, it's the last 10, 20% that takes the longest amount of time. Maybe it's only pulling 3 amps. So when that happens, now it can start charging the second one, and it can start charging 2 at a time. And the nice thing is, these products, it's like $650 for a 4 outlet one, but you can daisy chain them. So now you can start with 4, and then you go to 8, 12, 16, 20, and you plug it all into 120 volt, 20 amp outlet, and it's never going to blow the circuit, because this is another plug that's coming up here. But, some of our customers that have, been utilizing these PDMs, that's all the way from national to regional to the smaller, but, we sold to Brightview, Monarch, Gothic, Landcare, Park West, Patina, and there's one really up and coming great company in California, K&B Landscape.
Yeah, we have been in the midst of a massive transition to battery, and we are at probably as this podcast goes live, we're pretty much 90% there. By January 1st, we will be 100% battery powered across our entire platform of maintenance operating fleets. So what's exciting about the TOA infrastructure, their PDMs, is the fact, think of it for the landscapers out there, think of it like an irrigation controller. If you have a 50 station system and it's a big campus, right? And you just have all the valves turn on all at once at 9 p.m., there's no way there's enough water volume to feed all those valves. So someone a long time ago came up with an irrigation controller that turns on one valve at a time in sequence to allow enough volume and pressure for the sprinklers to come on. And sometimes, depending on the power and the pressure and the volume, right, of water, we can have 2 or 3 of these valves on at a time. And there's some smart controllers out there that are now able to actually manage this and turn certain valves on and off based on the available volume and pressure. So that type of analogy applies to electric. And it's the same thing. It's like if you have, for us, 20 trailers and there's 20 batteries in every trailer, you can't just plug them all in at once. You also don't need to, because we have like 15 hours of charging hours at night from the guys getting back to when we start the day off. So what TOA allows you to do is exactly, John, what you were saying, is it sequences the charging cycles. So it kind of turns, in an irrigation analogy, it turns the valves on and off based on the available wattage and amperage and the need from the batteries. And that allows you to basically have a few outlets and charge a massive amount of batteries all at the same charging opportunity, like overnight. So that's what we've been using it for. It's been just amazing for us just to be able to charge everything over the course of the evening. And by the next morning, everyone's ready to go, charged up, and they're deploying those battery assets into the field. So that's an easy way that I explain it to people who ask me, how are you getting 21 crews at one location charged up every night? And TOA is a big part of that.
Can I ask Justin about, and this might be a question for both of you, but like crew adoption. So for someone who is not around this as much in the Midwest, I mean, we don't have the electric mandates yet that California is seeing. What has crew adoption been like for going to electric from gas?
Well, first off, I want to be clear, and this is a thing I have to clear up all the time, is we are not required to go electric. There's no
Right.
mandate in California that says you have to go electric. Now
They're
there are
not
some,
selling gas-powered equipment in California
no,
anymore.
they are.
They
Yeah,
are,
they
okay.
are. So you can get gas everywhere still. And I think for the next year, you'll probably still be able to get gas. And after that, believe me, freight, Facebook and Marketplace and Craigslist, you'll be able to
Yeah.
get gas for probably the next 5 years.
Okay.
Gas is not going away.
That was definitely misunderstood by me because I thought for sure that it was January 1st that you were required, but yeah.
January 1st is you cannot buy a gas powered equipment, small engine, which is really a small engine. It's under a certain amount of CCs. So some of the bigger blowers and mowers still you can still buy them at the store. You just can't be manufactured after January 1st. So Steel and Echo and Husky, I mean, all these guys are very smart. They've got warehouses full of battery equipment manufactured in November and December of 2023
Mhm.
that are ready to be deployed and sent over to California. So by no means are we going to be in a shortage of gas powered equipment. And by no means is the state requiring us to switch over. Now, some facilities and campuses, like John mentioned, Apple, Netflix, Google, some HOAs, they just want electric equipment because it's just cleaner, it's quieter, it's a better look, and it's a better experience for their guests or their employees. So there's some push there, but right now, I would say 95, 96% of landscapers in California are still gas powered 100%. So, if that makes sense, right? And for us, it wasn't a decision around legislation or government interference. It's a decision to be the most strategically positioned company, both from a sales standpoint, a growth standpoint, and an operational efficiency standpoint. And for us to decide to go all in on battery was rooted in those three pillars. And I'm a very strategic CEO. I'm not going to make a decision that's not going to be in the betterment of our company's profits and our employee experience and our client experience. But if I can check all three boxes and I can do it while not, while seeing an ROI on my spend, it's a no-brainer. Crew adoption, and then John, I'll pass it over to you. I want to get your take on this, but crew adoption was really difficult. And for the last 3 years, we've struggled with this. And the reason why is because technically, I'll just be honest, the battery power sucked. It wasn't powerful enough. It wasn't durable enough. The batteries didn't last long enough. And then this brand came along earlier this year, and we did some demos of brand's Crest commercial outdoor power equipment. And for the one time, the guys were like, hey, this blower is more powerful than the bigger, steel backpacks. The 21-inch mower cuts better than the gas powered Toro mower that we had. And the crews actually started to ask if they can take the Crest trailer out. So we had 2 trailers fully converted, and we were demoing them. And we started to have guys actually ask if they can take the battery powered that day, which was in the past, it was like, you gave the battery power to the rookie crew leader because the senior guys wanted the gas powered stuff. And so finally we got to the point where the majority of the crews actually asked, hey, we're ready to go battery. And that was all we needed to hear. And then we made that switch. And thanks to Gardenland, Richard, and Manny and the team over there, I mean, within 2 weeks, I was surprised. Within 2 weeks, we had a warehouse full of Crest equipment, and not a small amount. It was intense. I mean, 21 trailers completely transitioned over in a matter of a few weeks. So the Gardenland guys helped us make the dreams a reality. And here we are today, fully automated and over to battery.
Yeah, talk about crew adoption. I'll take it kind of one step further is, when I was with Graves, we were doing demos out at Vandenberg Air Force Base. We did a pilot program out there, and, same thing. There were 10 crew members that were, had to mow all the lawns, the 990 residences, open areas, commercial spaces, soccer fields. And, we're showing them our Graves mower, 60-inch mower going back and forth, and they loved it. Because what happens, you got a 10-man crew that, shows up to a job site. If somebody calls in sick, well, you still got to get all the work done. So now they're overburdened with doing more work. So this was a way to get a lot of the mowing done autonomously so they could focus on, other things. And so we really looked at it as, when companies go to robotics and you don't have people sitting on a mower all day, you can upskill them and teach them to be an irrigation technician. They can do fertilizing, they can do hedging. There's all kinds of other things that they can do at a higher value so they can actually get paid more. And there's such a shortage of labor in the landscape industry to say that, this is going to take away jobs It's not. If anything, the robotics is going to create a whole nother level of jobs, which are roboticists that are deploying robots and managing fleets of robots. So not only do I think crews are going to start adopting the electrical, like the battery operated, like Justin said, I think they will also adopt the robotics, which, it's not 100% there yet. It's getting better and better. And it's just a matter of time before, all lawns get mowed robotically.
I'm so behind robotics and gosh, guys, I wish I could share some of the stuff I know. I'm actually under 2 NDAs right now with 2 different robotics companies, and I'm demoing some stuff that is incredible. And that's literally all I can say is next spring, be ready to deploy some robots because what I'm seeing right now in the field is it's kind of
Phenomenal.
scary, but it's so exciting. Hey, John, look, we're getting deep into this episode, and I want to get to this new venture that you started. I got to hear a little bit about this yesterday when we were prepping, but give us the summary, the overview of what you're doing with the folks over there at Colbor.
Yeah. So, like I said, I've had on a number of boards, after I left Jensen, which has also been a great learning experience. A couple of years ago, I started with Colbor Capital. They're a private equity group out of Chicago. What kind of makes them, distinctly different from a lot of other private equity groups is there are a lot of ex-military people that are, were in special forces. So you got Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Green Berets. So these guys are very disciplined. They believe in servant leadership. So if somebody screws up, it's not the person that screwed up. It's not their fault. It's the manager. It's the CEO. It's the board of directors. It's the team that did not give them the proper resources or training to accomplish the mission. The other thing that really sets them apart is whereas, most private equity companies will buy companies, they'll do a roll up and they'll sell in, 5 to 7 years. I was told by the people that recruited me for this board that people, because of their military background, because of their team mentality, servant leadership, they'll be able to do the same thing in 3 to 4 years. So they're very dedicated, very focused. And I'm like, yeah, sure. And, but when I worked with them on their board for about 2.5 years, I'm going to a board meeting and we're talking about the funnel of, who are we going to acquire? And next thing I hear is, well, we may be for sale. We may be selling within the next couple of months. And I'm like, wow, that was fast. So, within, 3 years with their first acquisition until they sold, and what that did is it gave companies that sold to them, this was called Monarch Landscape Partners out in Nashville, a lot of companies would sell and they would, invest some of the money into the platform. So they got, the proverbial second bite of the apple, upon a sale 3 years later.
And they didn't have to wait, 7+ years to get that.
Exactly. And then the other thing is, it's not like, once that private equity company sells to another private equity company, they don't have a job. If they're doing a good job with that company, there's going to be another opportunity for their career with a larger entity. It's a great way for a company to, sell. And especially if they want to stay on board for, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, get a second bite of the apple and have, more opportunity with a bigger entity. Like I said, I worked with them on the board of the Monarch Landscape Partners through Colbor Capital. And they reached out to me, earlier this year and said, hey, John, we enjoyed working with you on the board. And ALP was a successful roll up and exit. And let's talk about doing something on the West Coast. So I said, okay, I'd like to do that, but I'm involved in the TOA and I'm involved in garden land. I said, so long as I can keep doing that and work with you guys, I'd be happy to. And by the way, what I want to do is not only do a win up where we're buying landscape companies and, taking advantage of the efficiencies and the economies of scale, but really lean in on 4 pillars, that being battery operated equipment, robotics, AI, and technology. And they were, after I, told them about kind of what's happening in the landscape industry and about garden land and TOA, they're all in too. So we're looking at doing that, and through, I think, battery, robotics, AI, technology, it's going to become much more profitable. It's going to grow EBITDA. It's going to be easier to replicate. It's safer for the crews. It's win-win-win. And as robotics get better and better, so long as we're at the leading edge, it's going to transform the landscape industry. And I enjoy being a part of it and being involved with 3 companies that are on the leading edge.
Yeah. Well, it's incredible couple people that you've aligned yourself with today and going forward. So question, if there's people out there that are looking to potentially join the platform, it sounds like you guys haven't made an acquisition yet. I'm sure you got a lot of activity out there, but if someone's thinking, hey, maybe I can be the first man in and get an opportunity to really guide the vision and mission of what you're doing, how do they get a hold of you?
Yes, I think you can put on there, my cell phone number, 408-210-8797. The best way to get in touch with me is, send me a text and, or call me. We'll set up time to talk, even if it's not about selling your company, if it's about battery, if it's about charging, if it's about M&A. I love this industry. I love talking to people. I always learn as much by talking to somebody as I teach them. And it's all about, kind of giving back to the industry. So feel free to call me. My email address, real simple, John Vlay, JOHNVLAY @gmail.com.
I was going to ask you, our favorite thing about every episode is how we end it. And that's for our trade secret. So we definitely got a lot out of you today. And I was just curious, and all of this experience and all of these different things you're working on. First off, you're very busy. You are a very busy man. But what is your trade secret that you want to share with our listeners?
The one that I think, has helped me the most, through Jensen and through life is just always partner with others, especially in construction, partner with your vendors, your suppliers, your subcontractors, the landscape architect, the general contractor, the property manager. Never burn a bridge, because you never know when you may be hiring that person, or you may be working for that person, or that person may be in a position to, buy something from you or put you in a position to be successful. I think that is, never burn a bridge, and always treat other people in the industry or anybody that you're dealing with respect and partner with them.
That's great advice. I want to say something, John. I really appreciate you being so open with us and giving out your cell number. Just a quick experience share. This was 2015 when I was taking over our family company, K&D, and we're looking for companies to emulate, and obviously you look close to home. And one of those companies was Jensen. And so looking at Jensen when we were 1 million and what you guys had built and the size you guys were, and going to what you just said, the reputation that Jensen had and specifically the construction industry in the Bay Area was the top tier. I mean, that was the bar, that was the standard. And John Vlay was always a big name in the industry and still is. But when I was coming up, I just would remember, man, I've got to understand how this guy works, how he built this company. And it was always kind of this, looking from the outside in of how do we become a company similar to Jensen and what John Vlay has created. And so for me to have this opportunity to interview you today, it's kind of coming full circle. And so I just want to say thank you for that. And I just really appreciate your partnership with everybody in the industry, your willingness to give all your secrets and advice away. And if anyone's listening to this and you're wanting to build your career, wanting to build your company, take John up on his offer to talk and shoot him a text, because I've gotten a lot out from it. So John, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, Jeff. Hey, thank you so much for the kind words. And I really appreciate what you're doing for the industry and your strategy, and you're getting back to the industry. And you too, Maggie, with Aspire. It's a great product. It's been fun talking to you guys.
Yeah, thank you, John. We appreciate it. Have a good one.
All right, guys, that's another episode of Trades Talk in the book. Thanks so much for listening to the entire episode. Maggie and I do this as a passion project. So if you have a chance, please hit the subscribe button, share with one friend, and leave us a review. It goes a long way. And if you know any guests that you want to have on the Trades Talk podcast, make sure to reach out, send us a DM on socials, or get in touch with us. All right, guys, have a great rest of your day.